Welcome to the video introduction to Week 1 for Microeconomic Principles here at Rutgers University in Camden. And I just want to point out a few things. Make sure you go into Sakai and familiarize yourself with the functioning of Sakai. Also, my Econ Lab. If you go into Sakai and you click on the Syllabus and Intro tab, there will be a link for introductory videos, and the one at the bottom is My Econ Lab introductory videos. Make sure, even if you've used My Econ Lab, that you review this video. It gives some very helpful tips in navigating through My Econ Lab. It will point out to you, for example, if you're working on a homework assignment and you're having issues, there are tabs that you can click on that will give you hints to help you answer a question. If you still don't understand it, you can click on another link that will bring you into the e-text, the section that particularly pertains to that, so you can read through it and hopefully be able to figure out the question. So make sure you avail yourselves of that you're comfortable using My Econ Lab, and that you're comfortable using Sakai. Familiarize yourself with it. These are the main vehicles that we're using in the course, and if you have trouble navigating through them, you're not going to be able to efficiently work your way through the course. It's going to take you extra time. So make sure you're comfortable with using both Sakai and My Econ Lab. It is crucial for your experience with this online course. Also, during week 1, there are getting started assignments in My Econ Lab. Basically, these are set up to familiarize yourself further with the functioning of My Econ Lab. For example, there are questions that are interactive that allow you to draw points or draw graphs and move the graphs, etc., and highlight areas. Make sure you're comfortable using that particular item. So that first getting started section isn't really part of the course, but it is a way to test yourself on how well you understand the functioning of My Econ Lab. And I would highly suggest that you work your way through it, because if you're more comfortable using My Econ Lab, you're going to be more comfortable in absorbing the information that is available to you in this course. The first chapter we're going to go over is entitled The Scope and Method of Economics. And make sure that you understand with this chapter, it's just a very broad overview of how economists approach analysis. So there are many terms that are specific to economics. Make sure you're comfortable with these terms, particularly opportunity cost. We're going to be using opportunity cost, the concept of opportunity cost, throughout the entire course. So make sure you're comfortable with the notion of opportunity cost. Also, scarcity is very important. The notion of marginalism. So economists will often talk about the decision making at the margin, understanding what an economist means by a decision at the margin. Also, sunk costs and efficient markets are introduced. So make sure you understand these concepts. Sunk costs are oftentimes used in economics. Make sure you understand what a sunk cost is, and also what an efficient market, what constitutes an efficient market. Be comfortable with the differences between micro and macro. All right, we are taking microeconomic principles. There's also a macroeconomic principles. Make sure you understand the different definitions of each, and also be comfortable with being presented with a scenario and being able to accurately categorize it as a micro or a macro topic. Additionally, we go over the differences between positive and normative economics. This is a very important distinction. You could think of normative economics as having to do with making a value judgment, whereas positive economics is just a statement of fact. For example, I could make the statement that as people's levels of education increase, people have a tendency to make more money. That's a positive statement because it's a testable statement, and much of the economic literature shows that for most people, as education goes up, so does income. There's a relationship between the two. Normative, there's not really a way of testing it because it involves somebody making a value judgment. that there is a minimum level or a certain level that's appropriate. And there's no way to quantify if that is correct or not because it's part of their norms or part of their biases. Also, make sure you understand what is meant by economic theory versus descriptive economics. Also, make sure you understand the difference between a model and a variable. I will give you an example. I do a lot of work in healthcare economics, and a model is just an expression of a relationship between a variable and other variables. So if I use an example from health economics, if we were trying to model and predict what people's blood pressure is. So we might say blood pressure is a function of weight, smoking habits, and the history of the family members of that individual. So that's a model. Blood pressure is a function of these items. The model is made up of different variables. Blood pressure, we can measure blood pressure. We can measure systolic, diastolic blood pressure. We can measure somebody's weight. We can determine whether or not somebody's a smoker. We can do a history and see if there's a history of high blood pressure for that individual. We can quantify that. So make sure you're comfortable with that. Also, it's very important, there's a section on issues in economic analysis, and particularly the pitfalls, some of the common errors that people make. Be aware of those. And also, you understand and be able to use the 4 criteria in economic analysis. The next chapter is Scarcity of Choice, and this is where we start getting more and more into the meat and potatoes of economics. Again, make sure you're comfortable with the terminology. The first chapter will introduce a lot of terminology that economists use. Each discipline has its own terminology. Make sure you're comfortable with them. The concepts of capital, the factors of production inputs and outputs. Make sure you understand what an economist is meaning when an economist uses those terms. Distinguish between comparative and absolute advantage. So make sure you know what the definition is and how to actually apply them. The concepts of constant and increasing opportunity cost are very important. These impact the shape of the production possibilities frontier, which we will be discussing or looking at later in the chapter. So understanding what they mean and how they impact the production possibilities frontier. Also, the benefits of specialization and trade. Why is it that people are better off trading, and why does this notion of specialization and trade leading to better or higher levels of satisfaction for individuals? The main part of this chapter that you should understand is the production possibilities frontier. So make sure you understand what is meant by the production possibilities frontier. In shorthand, it's referred to as the PPF. And make sure you're comfortable with how economists use the PPF to illustrate the concept of a trade-off. And remember this, a trade-off is if you engage in an activity, you can't engage in another activity. So for example, if I decide that I'm going to go golfing on the weekend and spend 5 or 6 hours on the golf course and frustrating myself completely by being on the golf course, I can't spend that time doing consulting work and making money. So I'm making a trade-off. I decided that I would much rather spend money, go golfing, and frustrate myself to no end versus doing work and getting paid for it. So make sure you understand that if we engage in an activity, we spend money on something. If I spend $20 going out to eat, that's $20 I don't have to spend on something else. Also, make sure that you're comfortable with the PPF, but also levels of output that are efficient, inefficient, and impossible to produce. There are figures and there are videos that I posted that illustrate that. Make sure you're comfortable that if there's a question that says, assuming a PPF with increasing opportunity costs, that you know what that looks like. And then if the question says, show a level of production that is efficient, that you know where that goes. If they ask you to illustrate an output level of 2 commodities, that's impossible to attain. Where is that relative to the PPF? Calculate the marginal rate of transformation. The marginal rate of transformation is the slope of the PPF. So make sure you're comfortable calculating the slope of a PPF. And also the concept of economic growth. Economic growth just means that the PPF is shifting further and further to the right. So you're moving further and further away from the origin. So the PPF is moving outwards. That is what an economist means by economic growth. And finally, make sure you can distinguish between command and laissez-faire economies. The command economy is when the government decides on pricing and what gets produced and who gets produced, whereas laissez-faire, the markets themselves decide that. So make sure you understand that these are the main concepts that we're going to be going over for this particular week. So hopefully this helps you to better focus your efforts when it comes to what's required of you for week number 1.